Look closely at your own hands for a moment, because inside every tiny cell rests a genetic story stretching far beyond memory itself. For generations, many people believed human history could be explained through simple maps, familiar borders, and visible physical differences between populations across continents. That explanation feels comfortable because it matches what our eyes notice first, yet nature rarely follows the easiest story humans choose to believe. When scientists began comparing ancient and modern DNA from European and African populations, they expected familiar patterns supported by decades of archaeological research. Instead, every new sequence raised unexpected questions, revealing connections that refused to fit neat historical boundaries drawn by politics or tradition alone. Imagine standing beside an archaeological excavation where silent bones emerge beneath dusty soil after remaining untouched for thousands of years beneath changing landscapes. Each fragment carries invisible biological information, preserved despite wars, migrations, changing climates, and civilizations that disappeared long before written history existed. Researchers carefully extracted genetic material inside specialized laboratories, avoiding contamination, because even a single modern fingerprint could influence sensitive DNA analysis. Their work was not searching for superiority, but understanding how countless generations traveled, survived, adapted, and mixed across changing continents through time. Ancient rivers shifted their courses, deserts expanded, forests retreated, and families followed food, water, and safer places. Without knowing future history, remembered their journeys. Every migration left subtle genetic footprints, invisible to ancient travelers, but remarkably clear beneath modern sequencing machines built thousands of years later. The deeper scientists looked into European ancestry, the less straightforward the story appeared, challenging assumptions repeated across classrooms, documentaries, and popular conversations for decades. Evidence suggested Europe's earliest inhabitants experienced repeated waves of migration, each bringing new cultures, technologies, and genetic influences instead of complete replacement. African populations revealed something equally remarkable, preserving extraordinary genetic diversity created through humanity's longest continuous history on a single continent together. Rather than separate stories, researchers increasingly discovered overlapping chapters where distant populations shared ancient ancestors far older than expected by conventional historical thinking. Archaeology began supporting genetics, while genetics raised fresh archaeological questions, creating a conversation between buried artifacts and microscopic strands of inherited biological information. The growing evidence did not erase differences between populations, yet it revealed that those differences developed through remarkably interconnected human journeys across prehistoric landscapes. Scientists realized the real discovery was becoming much larger than comparing continents, because it challenged how people imagined their own family history altogether. If the oldest genetic clues connect humanity more deeply than anyone expected, what hidden chapter still waits beneath the next ancient skeleton uncovered tomorrow? Long before kingdoms, borders, or written languages existed, small groups of modern humans lived across diverse African landscapes, adapting to changing climates together. Dense forests, open grasslands, winding rivers, and expanding deserts shaped daily survival, encouraging remarkable genetic diversity through countless generations across the continent. Archaeological evidence indicates that Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa over 300,000 years ago, before gradually expanding into other regions. These early communities hunted, gathered, shared knowledge, raised children, and developed survival skills long before anyone imagined continents separated human identities permanently. Around 70,000 years ago, evidence suggests some groups gradually left northeastern Africa through routes influenced by climate, food availability, and changing sea levels. Their journeys were slow, lasting thousands of years rather than single expeditions, with each generation traveling only short distances before settling temporarily elsewhere. Some families followed coastlines rich with marine resources, while others crossed grasslands where migrating animals provided reliable food during favorable seasonal conditions. As generations passed, small communities reached the Near East, creating important crossroads connecting Africa, Asia, and eventually the European continent through repeated migrations. Scientists believe Europe was never populated during one single migration, but through multiple waves arriving thousands of years apart under different environmental conditions. The earliest Europeans encountered harsh climates, powerful predators, and unfamiliar landscapes, forcing every generation to adapt physically, culturally, and socially for long-term survival. Thousands of years later, farming communities expanded from Anatolia into Europe, bringing cultivated crops, domesticated animals, and fresh genetic contributions alongside innovative technologies. Another significant migration followed from the Eurasian steppe, where pastoral societies introduced different traditions, languages, and additional ancestry into many European populations over time. Instead of replacing earlier inhabitants completely, archaeological discoveries suggest these communities often mixed, exchanged ideas, and gradually formed increasingly complex societies together. Ancient burial sites reveal different tools, ornaments, and customs, showing cultural change, frequently accompanied movement, cooperation, and intermarriage rather than constant violent conflict. Meanwhile, African populations continued evolving across vast environments, maintaining extraordinary genetic diversity while experiencing their own migrations, innovations, and cultural transformations through history. Researchers discovered that human history resembles interconnected rivers joining repeatedly instead of isolated streams flowing independently toward completely separate destinations through time. Every ancient skeleton uncovered adds another piece, yet many questions remain because only a small fraction of prehistoric people left recoverable genetic evidence behind. As more forgotten graves emerge beneath European fields and African deserts, scientists wonder whether hidden DNA still holds unexpected chapters waiting beneath ordinary ground. Inside modern laboratories, researchers extract tiny DNA fragments from ancient bones using sterile equipment designed to prevent contamination from present-day genetic material. Every successful sequence becomes another historical record, allowing scientists to compare ancient populations without depending entirely upon written documents or traditional archaeology. DNA does not preserve complete biographies, yet it records inherited relationships connecting families, communities, and migrations across thousands of years through measurable genetic patterns. Researchers compared genomes from ancient European remains with genetic data collected from diverse African populations using carefully validated scientific methods and international collaboration. The comparisons revealed expected differences because populations separated geographically gradually developed unique genetic patterns through adaptation, migration, and ordinary genetic variation over time. However, scientists also discovered remarkable shared ancestry, reaching much deeper into history than modern national identities or recent historical events could ever explain. Evidence consistently supports that every living person ultimately traces ancestry back to African populations, where modern humans first evolved hundreds of thousands years ago. That shared origin remains one of the strongest conclusions, supported by genetics, archaeology, fossils, and multiple independent scientific disciplines studying early human evolution. Another surprising finding involved genetic diversity rather than simple difference between continents, challenging assumptions often repeated outside professional scientific research communities today. African populations contain the greatest known human genetic diversity because modern humans lived across Africa far longer before groups gradually expanded elsewhere worldwide. When smaller groups migrated beyond Africa, they carried only part of that original diversity through what scientists describe as population bottlenecks during migration events. European populations later gained additional ancestry through repeated migrations, including early hunter-gatherers, Anatolian farming communities, and pastoral groups from the Eurasian steppe. Instead of remaining genetically unchanged, Europe experienced continuous mixing, meaning modern Europeans inherited DNA from several ancient populations rather than one ancestral community. Scientists also compared ancient genomes with living populations, discovering some lineages disappeared entirely while others survived through countless generations into the present day. These findings remind researchers that human history includes movement, adaptation, disease, climate change, and cooperation instead of isolated populations remaining permanently unchanged forever. Importantly, genetic differences between populations represent tiny variations within overwhelmingly shared human DNA, with all people sharing more than 99% similarity. Researchers emphasize that genetics cannot support claims ranking populations because inherited variation reflects adaptation, migration, and history instead of human worth or capability. Every newly sequenced genome answers one historical question, yet raises another, leaving scientists wondering which forgotten ancestors still remain undiscovered beneath ancient landscapes worldwide. The comparison between European and African DNA did not uncover separate human stories, but revealed one remarkably connected history spanning countless generations together. Every modern population carries inherited traces of ancient migrations, environmental adaptations, and encounters that shaped humanity long before recorded civilizations emerged worldwide. The greatest surprise was not discovering unexpected differences, but understanding how deeply every human population remains connected through shared ancient ancestry across time. Scientists continue refining these conclusions because new archaeological discoveries regularly provide additional evidence that improves previous interpretations without replacing established scientific foundations entirely. Ancient caves, forgotten burial grounds, and preserved human remains still contain valuable information waiting for careful excavation and responsible scientific investigation across continents. Each recovered genome adds another voice to history, helping researchers reconstruct journeys that written records never preserved for future generations to understand. Modern genetics works alongside archaeology, geology, climate science, and anthropology because no single discipline alone can fully explain humanity's extraordinary past completely. Researchers emphasize that DNA offers probabilities and relationships rather than perfect historical certainty, requiring careful interpretation supported by multiple independent scientific discoveries together. Some ancient populations disappeared completely, while others survived through descendants whose inherited DNA still exists inside millions of people living across Earth today. That realization transforms ordinary family history into something much larger, connecting every individual with migrations beginning tens of thousands of years before recorded history. The story of Europe cannot be understood without Africa, just as Africa's history remains essential to understanding humanity's remarkable global expansion across continents together. Modern borders, languages, and cultures developed recently compared with the immense timescale recorded inside human DNA through countless generations of inherited biological information. The evidence encourages curiosity instead of division, reminding us that scientific discoveries often reveal connections where earlier assumptions imagined permanent separation between populations. Researchers expect future technology will recover older and more complete ancient genomes, revealing details impossible for previous generations of scientists to examine accurately. Those discoveries may answer long-standing questions while creating entirely new mysteries, continuing humanity's endless search for understanding its own remarkable origins through evidence. Perhaps the greatest lesson comes from recognizing that every person carries a small surviving fragment of an ancient journey, stretching beyond imagination and memory. The comparison that surprised scientists ultimately revealed complexity instead of simplicity, replacing familiar assumptions with a richer, evidence-based understanding of human history together. As research continues, every new discovery reminds us that humanity shares one extraordinary story, still unfolding beneath our feet and within our DNA today. If this journey changed your perspective, consider subscribing and joining future explorations into the hidden scientific stories that continue reshaping humanity's remarkable past.